Admiral Evelyn Kane stood before the viewport of her flagship, the Resolute, watching the debris of a decimated colony drift in the cold, empty void. The transmission she had just received, the final transmission from the colony of Valeria 5, kept replaying in her mind, echoing the cries of survivors and the frantic warnings of a dying people. We tried to negotiate. Please, someone, stop them. The Zorath. The message had ended abruptly as the colony's defensive systems were overrun in the final moments. Humanity's worst nightmare had arrived. She inhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. The cool metal of the command console beneath her fingertips grounded her, though the weight of responsibility was suffocating. This was no longer just about diplomacy or the avoidance of war. It was about survival. The Zorath had crossed a line one Evelyn could no longer ignore. What had been a lingering, distant threat for years had now become an urgent, immediate crisis. They had attacked, unprovoked, targeting unarmed civilian colonies. No amount of negotiation could stop them now. War was no longer an abstract concept. It was a cruel, violent reality that Evelyn would have to face head-on. "Admiral," a voice cut through her thoughts. It was Captain Tyrell, her second-in-command. "We've intercepted a Zorath transmission. They're moving toward the Escary sector, and it looks like they're planning an all-out assault on our defense line." Evelyn turned to face him, her mind already racing. The Escary sector was a critical part of humanity's outer defenses. If the Zorath took it, they would have a direct path to Earth itself. Humanity's core worlds would be vulnerable. She couldn't let that happen. "Prepare the fleet," Evelyn ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We can't afford to let them gain ground. The time for peace is over." As Tyrell nodded and exited the room, Evelyn felt the crushing weight of her decision. She wasn't built for this. She had spent her career avoiding war, using her skills as a diplomat to forge alliances, prevent conflicts, and negotiate peace. She had always believed in the power of dialogue, that there was always a way to solve disputes without violence. But now, staring at the cold, indifferent stars, she realized something. Peace, in its ideal form, was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. The human fleet under her command was formidable. It was one of the largest in the galaxy, with an advanced array of weapons, ships, and technology. Yet even with all their power, Evelyn knew that a full-scale war with the Zorath would be catastrophic. The Zorath were ruthless, their warships designed for total annihilation, their tactics brutal and relentless. For every victory humanity would gain, countless lives would be lost. She turned back to the viewport, looking at the scattered remnants of Valeria 5 once more. There was no turning back. The first step of war had been taken, against her will, but with the full knowledge that humanity's survival was now at stake. The stakes were too high for hesitation. Evelyn's hands trembled for just a moment as she placed them on the console, steadying herself. She had to make sure that the cost of this war was not the total destruction of everything she had worked for. This fight, she realized, wasn't just about defending humanity. It was about forging the path back to peace, no matter how impossible it might seem. "Prepare for battle," Evelyn whispered to herself, her resolve hardening. "We will not fall." Evelyn sat in her command chair, the dim lighting of the bridge casting long shadows across her face. The hum of the Resolute's engines filled the silence, the only sound in the vast, sterile space of the flagship. She had just received word that the fleet was ready for departure, but Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this war, this senseless conflict, was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The Zorath hadn't just attacked, they had annihilated. Colonies reduced to ash, millions of lives lost, and for what? Land? Resources? Or was there something deeper at play, something more than simple conquest? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of an incoming transmission. A secured message. Her heart skipped. Only one person would send a message this urgently. "Admiral Kane," the familiar voice crackled from the comms. This is Serath. We need to talk. Serath, a name that, until now, had been little more than a whisper on the edges of her mind. A former Zorath general, disgraced and exiled after questioning his own people's brutal methods. He had reached out to her once before, through back channels, suggesting that peace might still be possible. At the time, she had dismissed him as an idealist. But with the war now unfolding around her, she wasn't so sure anymore. Evelyn, listen carefully. Zorath's voice continued, low and urgent. The Zorath are not the mindless destroyers you think them to be. There are factions within our empire that do not want this war. We want peace. But if you continue down this path, you will make it impossible for us to stop the hardliners. You will force us to destroy everything. Evelyn clenched her fists, heart pounding. Could she trust him? A part of her screamed that the Zorath could never change. Their history of bloodshed was too entrenched. But another part, a quieter part, wondered if this could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. A chance to avert further devastation, to prevent more innocents from dying. But how could she gamble the lives of so many on the words of one man, especially a former enemy? Why should I believe you? Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. What's to stop you from using this as a trap? You've already proven the lengths your people will go to. I've paid the price for questioning the Zorath's path. Zorath's voice was tight with emotion. I was exiled for speaking out against the destruction. Now I'm trying to stop it. But I need your help. You must pull back. Call off your attacks, just for a moment. Meet me, in neutral space, away from prying eyes. I have information that could end this war before it even truly begins. Evelyn's mind raced, torn between duty and desperation. Every instinct told her that peace was a lie, a fleeting hope that would only lead to more bloodshed. But then again, she had always believed in the possibility of peace, hadn't she? How many times had she brokered ceasefires in the past, brought warring factions to the table to resolve disputes? You have 1 hour, she said, her voice hardening as she made the decision. But know this, Zorath, if this is a trap, I will make sure you regret it. Zorath's response was a faint sigh of relief. Thank you, I'll send coordinates. I'll see you there. The transmission ended, leaving Evelyn in the quiet aftershock of her decision. Her mind was filled with questions, doubts, and fears. Could peace truly be an option? Or was Zorath simply playing her, trying to buy time for his people to regroup? If he was sincere, could they really avoid a galaxy-wide war? Admiral, Captain Tyrell's voice broke through her thoughts, his figure appearing in the doorway. Are we standing down? Evelyn looked at him, her eyes steely with determination. We're meeting them. Prepare a shuttle. I'm going alone. Tyrell's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't question her. Understood, ma'am. As Evelyn walked toward the shuttle bay, her mind churned with the weight of her decision. She was stepping into the unknown, no backup, no guarantees. Just her and the possibility of peace. If Xerath was lying, if this was all a ruse, she would have no way of knowing until it was too late. But she had to try. The stakes were too high. The blood of countless innocents was on the line, and if there was even the slightest chance of ending this nightmare, she would take it. The shuttle doors closed behind her with a quiet hiss, and the engine roared to life. Evelyn's hands gripped the controls with a mixture of resolve and fear. She was about to face the Zorath, and in a way, she was about to face herself. The leader she had never wanted to be, but the leader the galaxy desperately needed. The shuttle's engines hummed softly as it sped through the empty void, making the long journey to neutral space. Evelyn's mind was far from at ease. The flickering stars outside the viewport offered no comfort. The deep silence of the shuttle seemed to amplify the weight of her thoughts. She had made a dangerous choice. To trust Xerath, to even entertain the idea that peace was still possible, was a gamble she could not afford to lose. As the shuttle glided through the darkness, she replayed the message in her mind. Xerath had been clear. The Zorath were not a unified force. A faction of them, led by the hardliners, had taken control, pushing for total annihilation of humanity and anyone who stood in their way. But there were those like Zerath, disillusioned generals and soldiers, who had come to believe that the Zorath's path was a dead end. Evelyn had seen it before in her years of peacekeeping. Factions within a military or government that fought not for a noble cause, but out of fear, tradition, or simply a desire to hold power. But could the Zorath's internal strife be real, or was it simply a distraction to buy time while they planned their next move? The coordinates flashed on the screen in front of her, signaling the meeting point was near. Evelyn felt her stomach twist in anticipation. The space around her was eerily empty, not a single ship in sight. This was neutral ground, a space where no faction had authority. It was perfect for an undercover meeting, but it also meant that nothing would protect her if this went wrong. As the shuttle approached the designated point, her comms crackled to life. "Admiral Kane, this is Serath. I see you've arrived." His voice was calm, measured, and yet there was an edge to it that suggested his own nerves were stretched thin. "I'm here. Let's make this quick," Evelyn replied, her voice tight with resolve. A moment of silence followed before Exarath spoke again, his tone carrying an almost imperceptible hint of urgency. "I'm sending you coordinates for my ship. Don't trust anyone else in this space. I'll explain everything once we're aboard. The Zorath are not the only ones you need to worry about." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You'll understand when you get here. Just trust me," he said, his voice tinged with something that almost sounded like fear. The transmission ended before Evelyn could respond. Her gut twisted. Not the only ones. What else was going on in the galaxy? She'd already seen how powerful and destructive the Zorath could be, but the idea that there was something else, something even more dangerous lurking in the shadows, unsettled her. The coordinates led her to a quiet section of the sector, far from any major trade routes or military bases. A stealth ship, a sleek, dark silhouette against the void, awaited her arrival. As she closed in, the docking bay doors opened, revealing the Zorath vessel. Nothing like the monstrosities that had ravaged human colonies. This ship was smaller, more precise, built for speed and subtlety rather than brute force. It was, to Evelyn's surprise, beautiful in its design, angular and symmetrical, a far cry from the chaos she had come to expect from the Zorath. The shuttle docked smoothly, and Evelyn exited, her boots clicking on the metallic floor of the Zorath ship. There was a quiet tension in the air, a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Her hand rested on the hilt of her sidearm, though she knew using it would only make things worse. The ship was eerily calm, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched from the shadows. Zarath emerged from the shadows ahead, his tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow on the floor. His uniform was simple, no markings to identify his rank, a sign of his defection. The alien general's face was tense, and his eyes burned with something between hope and desperation. "You're here," he said, his voice a little softer now. "Good. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "I'm here. Let's talk," Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. She could sense the unease in his voice, but she had no time to waste. "You've got my attention. Now, explain what you meant by not the only ones." Zarath's eyes narrowed as he led her down a narrow corridor, his footsteps steady but quick. "I'll explain everything once we're in the conference room. There are things you need to understand about the true power behind the Zorath." They reached a small, secure room. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Evelyn stepped inside, her senses on high alert. The walls were lined with intricate panels, each flashing with encrypted data. A table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs. Ezerath motioned for her to sit. As she did, Ezerath took a seat opposite her, leaning forward slightly. "The Zorath are a puppet to a greater force, one that has been manipulating events for centuries. The true power isn't the Zorath Empire. It's something older, something darker." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Who is behind the Zorath? Zorath's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something close to fear in them. The Eldritch. Evelyn's mind raced as Zorath's words echoed in her ears. The Eldritch. The name was unfamiliar, but the weight it carried sent a shiver down her spine. The Zorath had always been ruthless, but this new revelation suggested something far more sinister, a hidden, shadowy force pulling the strings. If what Xerath said was true, then the war with the Zorath might just be the surface of something much larger, something far more dangerous. The Eldritch, Evelyn repeated slowly, trying to process the new information. Who are they? Why haven't we heard of them before? Zorath's eyes darkened as he leaned back in his chair, his posture stiff with tension. The Eldritch are an ancient race, older than the Zorath or humanity. They are not from this galaxy. They arrived long ago, and we were too weak to stop them. They live in the shadows, manipulating empires and nations, playing one side against the other for their own gain. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. So the Zorath are their puppets. The war, the destruction, it's all part of their plan. Xerath nodded gravely. Exactly. The Eldritch feed off chaos, war, and suffering. They've been secretly steering the Zorath Empire for centuries, using their aggression to destabilize the galaxy. But their ultimate goal isn't just to see the Zorath rise. They want total control of this galaxy, and they're willing to destroy everything in their path to get it. The weight of the situation hit Evelyn like a hammer. For years, humanity had focused on the Zorath, trying to understand them, trying to prevent their expansion. But what if the Zorath weren't the real enemy? What if they were just the instrument of something far worse? How do you know all of this? Evelyn asked, her voice tight with suspicion. You were a general in the Zorath army. Why would they tell you their plans? Zorath's eyes flickered with a mix of shame and anger. I didn't know at first. I was just following orders like everyone else. But as I rose through the ranks, I started to see the truth, how the Eldritch were manipulating our leaders, how they controlled our decisions, our strategies. I began to question it, and that's when they labeled me a traitor. They wanted to keep the truth hidden, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Evelyn's mind was spinning. If Xerath was telling the truth, then the entire galaxy was in more danger than she had ever imagined. The Zorath had always been a threat, but now it seemed they were merely pawns in a much larger, more malevolent game. And that game had no boundaries. If the Eldritch were truly manipulating the war, then there was no telling how far they had infiltrated the galaxy. Who could be trusted? Then why reach out to me? Evelyn asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. You're a deserter. You've betrayed your people. What makes you think I'll trust you? Zorath's expression softened, his usual hardness giving way to something more vulnerable. Because you're the only one who can stop them. You've seen the truth of war. You understand that it's not just about winning battles. It's about preventing the destruction of everything we hold dear. The Eldritch want to fracture the galaxy, turn its people against each other, until nothing remains but their rule. The Zorath are just the beginning. If they succeed, the galaxy will fall. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, to reject Xerath's plea for help. But something in his eyes, something raw and desperate, made her hesitate. What if he was right? What if the galaxy was already caught in a web spun by the Eldritch, and the Zorath were just the first domino to fall? How do we fight them? Evelyn asked, her voice low. Zorath didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on the table, and a holographic display flickered to life between them. It showed a map of the galaxy, with glowing lines tracing the movements of Zorath fleets and shadowy clusters of red dots marking key points of interest. The Eldritch don't fight in the open, Zorath explained. They influence from the shadows, pulling the strings of governments, military leaders, even the minds of entire populations. The Zorath are merely their weapon, a tool to create the chaos they need to bring their true power into play. Evelyn studied the map intently, her mind already strategizing. What can we do? How do we stop them? There's only one way to defeat the Eldritch, Azeroth said, his voice low and resolute. We have to expose them. We have to reveal their control over the Zorith and the other factions they've corrupted. But we can't do it alone. We need allies, others who have been caught in the Eldritch's web. We need to unite the galaxy's forces, not just to fight the Zorith, but to break the hold the Eldritch have over us. Evelyn felt the weight of his words. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and deception, but Xerath's words rang with truth. The Zorith were not the true enemy. The Eldritch were the ones pulling the strings, and if they weren't stopped, the entire galaxy would be consumed by their malevolent influence. We'll need the Trell, Evelyn said, her voice firm. They have the resources and the diplomatic power to bring others to the table. We'll need their help to rally the galaxy's forces. Xerath nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Yes, but we must move quickly. The Eldritch will not wait forever. If we act too late, their hold will be unbreakable. Evelyn stood, determination hardening her resolve. Then we don't have time to waste. We're going to end this, before it ends us. The gravity of the situation settled heavily on Evelyn as she prepared for the next phase of the plan. Azeroth had given her a glimpse of the true enemy, the Eldritch, and now she was more certain than ever that the fate of the galaxy rested on the fragile alliance she was about to build. The Zorith were powerful, yes, but their brutality had been manipulated for a purpose. It was the Eldritch that truly posed the threat, an ancient force operating from the shadows, manipulating countless factions for their own gain. Admiral, Tyrell's voice came over the comms, breaking her thoughts. The Trell delegation has agreed to meet with you in the Zoria system. They're ready to discuss the matter of the Zorith, but it will take more than words to convince them to act. Evelyn turned away from the map, focusing on the tactical readouts projected in front of her. The Trell were an advanced diplomatic race, known for their neutral stance in galactic conflicts. Their decision to meet wasn't a given. They rarely took sides in military affairs. But the Zorith threat, combined with the secret manipulation of the Eldritch, had changed things. The Trell weren't blind to the tides of war shifting in the galaxy, but whether they would truly commit to a resistance movement was another matter entirely. Tell the Trell I'll be there, Evelyn replied, her voice steady. We need them, now more than ever. As she prepared to leave the Zorath ship, she paused to look back at Azeroth, who had been silent, watching her from across the room. His eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. He had taken a great risk by joining her cause, betraying his people, and now he was asking her to lead a campaign against the Eldritch. It was a monumental task, but one that Evelyn knew she could not turn away from. Xerath, I need you to stay in contact with the other factions we might need to unite. The Zorith aren't the only ones under the Eldritch's sway. If we're going to win this, we need to expose them for who they really are. Xerath nodded, a solemn expression crossing his features. I'll do what I can, Admiral, but be careful. The Eldritch have spies everywhere. We can trust no one completely. Evelyn's jaw tightened at his words. Trust. It was the one thing she needed, and the one thing she couldn't afford to give too freely. Every leader they would approach, every faction they would try to unite, had the potential to be compromised, either by the Eldritch or by their own motivations. There would be no easy alliances, no simple solutions. The path to victory was fraught with peril, and she would need to be more than just a diplomat. She would need to be a leader, a strategist, and a warrior, just like the one she had long avoided becoming. The journey to the Zoria system was quick, though the uncertainty of the coming meeting weighed heavily on Evelyn. The Trell were known for their incredible intelligence, their knack for reading situations and people, and their highly developed technological systems. However, their neutrality meant they didn't easily take a side in galactic wars, especially when the stakes were so high. She couldn't afford a refusal, not when every moment was precious. Upon entering the Zoria system, the Trell flagship loomed large in the distance. It was an elegant, sleek vessel, built for both diplomacy and defense, its surface reflecting the cold stars around it. As the Resolute approached, an envoy of Trell ships materialized around them, silently escorting them into the Trell station. Evelyn stood at the bridge, Tyrell at her side, as they docked. The bridge was filled with the low hum of activity, the officers working tirelessly to prepare for any eventuality. Evelyn had made it this far, but the real challenge lay ahead, securing the Trell's involvement in the fight against the Zorath and, more crucially, the Eldritch. The door to the shuttle bay opened, and a small delegation of Trell diplomats entered, led by the dignified, silver-haired Ambassador Alara. Her people were known for their quiet grace, but their presence was commanding, and Evelyn could already feel the weight of their collective intellect pressing in. "Admiral Kane," Alara greeted her, her voice smooth and measured, the soft tones of her species carrying an air of reverence. "We are honored by your presence. You requested our audience, and we have come." Evelyn stepped forward, extending a hand in greeting. "Ambassador Alara, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I know you've remained neutral in galactic matters, but what I'm asking for today is no ordinary request. The Zorath are not the enemy we thought they were. There's a far greater threat lurking in the shadows, one that is manipulating them, and others, to bring chaos to the galaxy. I need your help to expose this threat." Alara studied her intently, her sharp eyes unblinking. "You speak of the Eldritch. We have heard rumors, whispers from those who had claimed to have seen them, but we have no proof, no evidence that they even exist, let alone control the Zorath." "They exist," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "And they have been pulling the strings for far too long. The Zorath are only the first wave. We need to unite the galaxy's forces before the Eldritch can bring about their final destruction." Alara remained silent for a long moment, her eyes shifting to the map of the galaxy displayed in front of them. Finally, she spoke. "If this is true, Admiral, then we have no choice but to act. The galaxy cannot afford another war, but we cannot allow the Eldritch to succeed in their plans. We will join you." Evelyn's heart lifted. The Trell had agreed. Now, with their support, she had a fighting chance. But the path ahead would only grow darker. There were still many factions to unite, and far more dangerous enemies to face. With the Trell's formal agreement to join the resistance, Evelyn felt a rare flicker of hope. But she knew better than to mistake this victory for the end of the battle. The Eldritch were still hidden, their influence still festering in the depths of the galaxy. The Zorath were only one piece of a much larger puzzle, and now that the Trell had joined their cause, Evelyn was tasked with bringing more factions to the table, each with its own doubts, fears, and motivations. Her first priority was the Shalaran Alliance. The Shalarans, a warlike but fiercely honorable species, were known for their vast military forces and their bitter history with the Zorath. They had been on the front lines of the conflict for years and might be their strongest ally, but they also had a deep distrust of any outsiders, especially those who had once fought alongside their enemies. Evelyn sat at the war table aboard the Resolute, surrounded by her key advisors. Tyrell, her trusted operations officer, stood by her side, ready to coordinate the next steps. Zeroth, now serving as her intelligence officer, was standing at the far end of the room, scanning a digital map of the galaxy. "We're meeting with the Shalaran delegation in 3 days," Tyrell said, pulling up a holographic projection of the Shalaran homeworld. "They're stubborn, but they're pragmatic. If we can convince their leadership that the Eldritch are the true threat, they might listen." Azeroth turned, his voice cutting through the quiet of the war room. "The Shalarans respect strength. You fought the Zorath alongside them, but they will need more than words to trust you, Admiral. You need to show them you're capable of leading a coalition, show them that we're serious." Evelyn nodded. She understood the gravity of the situation. Convincing the Shalorans wasn't just about words. It was about proving they could stand together, united in a common cause. We'll show them that we're ready to fight. I'll lead the first strike against the Zorath in their space. We can't waste time. We'll need to be careful, Tyrell interjected. The Zorath might have spies among the Shalorans. We can't afford to tip our hand too early. Evelyn's gaze hardened. Then we'll make sure they don't find out. I'll contact the Shaloran leaders personally. We'll do this by their rules. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The fleet was mobilized, and strategies were devised to show the Shalorans that this was more than just another war. It was a fight for the survival of the galaxy. But as Evelyn watched the ships prepare for departure, doubt lingered in her mind. Every move they made was a gamble. If they failed to convince the Shalorans, the coalition would collapse before it had even begun. The day of the meeting arrived. Evelyn, along with her closest officers, boarded the shuttle that would take them to the Shaloran capital. The journey was silent, each member of her team lost in their own thoughts. As they entered the Shaloran system, a heavy atmosphere hung over them. The Shalorans were known for their elaborate space stations, massive structures floating among the stars, and the sight of their capital station, Varnak Prime, looming ahead, only intensified Evelyn's sense of urgency. The Shaloran leader, Chancellor Zhan, was waiting for them on the station. The meeting room was dimly lit, with intricate Shaloran symbols etched into the walls. The air was thick with the weight of centuries-old tradition, and Evelyn knew that this would be a delicate negotiation. She couldn't afford any missteps. Chancellor Zhan stood as they entered, his tall, muscular frame casting a shadow over the room. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. He nodded to Evelyn as she approached. Admiral Kane, it is an honor, though I do not often entertain those who once fought against us. Evelyn remained composed. Chancellor Zhan, I understand the distrust, but I am here because I believe we share a common enemy. The Zorath are no longer the true threat in this galaxy. There is a force behind them, one that seeks to control everything. Zhan's gaze flickered with skepticism. And you expect me to believe this? The Zorath have been our enemy for centuries. You expect us to fight alongside humans and traitors who have aligned themselves with them. Evelyn didn't flinch. The Zorath are nothing more than a tool, a weapon for something far older. The Eldritch have been manipulating the galaxy for millennia, using the Zorath to weaken us all. If we don't act now, we will all be slaves to their will. For a long moment, there was silence. Evelyn felt the weight of Zhan's stare. He was weighing her words carefully, searching for any hint of deception. Finally, he spoke. We know the Zorath have been acting erratically, Zhan said, his voice low and measured. We've seen evidence of factions within their ranks, divisions that seem to run deeper than mere political unrest. But you ask us to trust you, and that is not so easily given. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady. I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm asking for a chance to prove that we can fight together. We have already started the fight against the Zorath. Join us, and we will show you that there is a way to defeat the Eldritch. We are not asking for allies, Chancellor, we are asking for partners. Zhan studied her for a long time, then glanced toward his council, who stood silently at his side. He nodded slowly, his face a mask of resolve. We will see your proof, Admiral, he said, his tone hardening. But know this, if you fail, if you cannot deliver on your promises, the Shaloran Alliance will stand alone. Evelyn held his gaze, her heart racing, but her resolve unwavering. Then we'll succeed, together. The tension in the meeting room was palpable. Chancellor Zhan's words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in the form of a warning. Evelyn knew that failure wasn't an option. If she couldn't convince the Shalorans that the Eldritch were the true enemy, then the entire resistance would collapse under the weight of their mistrust. She had no choice but to make this work, whatever the cost. The Shaloran fleet had agreed to join the coalition, but only if the first strike against the Zorith was successful and the evidence of the Eldritch's manipulation was undeniable. Evelyn had no illusions. This would be no ordinary mission. It would be a test of everything they had built so far. The Shallorans would not forgive failure, and the Eldritch would stop at nothing to ensure they remained in the shadows. The Resolute and the Shalloran forces, now unified under Evelyn's command, left the safety of the capital and entered the war-torn sectors of the galaxy. Their target was a key Zoreth stronghold in the Corlean Nebula, an area of dense ionized space that had long been a strategic point for both sides. The Zoreth had been fortifying their position there, unaware of the approaching resistance fleet. As the fleet advanced toward the nebula, Evelyn stood on the bridge, watching the swirling mass of gas and dust. The stars around them were barely visible, hidden behind the thick veil of the nebula's electromagnetic interference. It was the perfect place for an ambush, if they could get through undetected. "We'll be in range of the Zoreth stronghold in 3 hours, Tyrell reported, his voice steady. Shalloran reconnaissance drones are already in position. We should be able to move in without them knowing we're here." Zerath, who had been quietly observing the monitors, turned toward Evelyn. "The Zoreth will be on high alert. They've been expecting a strike. We can't afford any mistakes." Evelyn nodded, her mind already working through the possible contingencies. They couldn't risk being caught off guard. The Zorath's strategic positions in the nebula were vulnerable, but they were also highly defended. She knew that the first strike had to be swift and decisive, with overwhelming force. Any hesitation, any miscalculation, could tip the balance in the Zorath's favor, and if the Shalloran saw even the smallest failure, they might pull out. "We'll deploy the Shalloran heavy ships in the front lines," Evelyn decided, her voice cold with determination. "They're stronger, and their ships are built for close-quarters combat. We'll use our lighter cruisers and stealth ships to flank them and take out their communications and reinforcements. Zerath, I want you to oversee the intelligence operation. No surprises." Khazarath gave a grim nod. "Understood, Admiral. I'll make sure we have all the intel we need before we engage." The next few hours were filled with the quiet, tense movements of battle preparation. Crew members moved swiftly, checking weapon systems, calibrating shields, and ensuring that every ship in the fleet was ready for combat. The air on the Resolute was thick with anticipation, the hum of the engines vibrating through the floor as the fleet advanced toward the enemy stronghold. As they entered the outer edge of the nebula, a sharp alarm sounded throughout the ship. The Zoreth had detected their presence. The enemy was on high alert. "They've seen us," Tyrell reported, his fingers dancing over the control panels. "Deploying defensive maneuvers." Evelyn's mind raced. No turning back now. "All ships, prepare for battle." "Shalloran fleet, take the lead," Evelyn ordered, her voice unwavering. "Engage on my mark." The fleet accelerated into the heart of the nebula, its ships skimming dangerously close to the swirling storm of particles and energy. The Zoreth stronghold came into view, a massive fortress station surrounded by waves of smaller ships. It was heavily fortified, yet Evelyn saw an opening. "Now," she commanded. The Shalloran ship surged forward, cutting through the nebula with terrifying precision. Their massive, jagged vessels unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, tearing through the Zorath's defenses. The Zoreth responded immediately, sending wave after wave of fighters to intercept. But the Shalloran ships were more than a match for them, their heavy armor and advanced weaponry turning the tide in the opening moments of the battle. Evelyn's light cruisers swooped in behind the Shallorans, launching a series of stealth bombs that disabled the Zoreth's outer communication towers. The Resolute led the charge, its engines blazing as it carved a path toward the heart of the stronghold. The Zoreth began to panic, unable to communicate with their reinforcements. "Get those capital ships into position," Tyrell shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. "We need to break through their shields." Evelyn watched as the Zorath's massive vessels retaliated, firing heavy plasma bolts that slammed into the Shalaran ships, sending one of their flagships into a spin. The sight sent a shockwave of fear through the Resistance fleet. If the Shalarans lost their flagship, it would be a devastating blow to morale. Evelyn clenched her fists, fighting the urge to hesitate. There was no room for mercy now. Shalaran flagship, hold tight. Evelyn shouted into the comm. We'll push through. This isn't over yet. The battle raged on, the noise of exploding ships and the crackle of weapons fire filling the space around them. But Evelyn didn't look away. She had made a promise to Jan, and now she had to keep it. For the first time since she had started this mission, Evelyn felt the full weight of the responsibility she carried. The galaxy was on the brink, and this fight was the first real chance they had to strike at the heart of the Zorath and the Eldritch. The battle was far from won, but this was their moment. The battle had reached its peak. The Resolute and the Shalaran fleet were locked in fierce combat with the Zorath forces. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of the nebula, their brief flares of light casting eerie shadows over the battlefield. The Zorath were relentless, but Evelyn could see their defenses beginning to crumble. The resistance had gained momentum, and the Shalaran flagship was holding its ground, though heavily damaged. Evelyn stood on the bridge, her eyes locked on the tactical map as her officers reported updates. Every movement, every second counted. They couldn't afford to lose their advantage now. They needed to destroy the Zorath stronghold, but more importantly, they needed to send a clear message to the Eldritch. Humanity and its allies would not be controlled. Admiral, Tyrell said, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. The Zorath are retreating to their central command station. We have a clear shot to strike. But the Zorath have activated their last line of defense. We'll need to breach their shield generators first. Evelyn nodded, already analyzing the situation. The Zorath had committed everything they had to this last stand, knowing the importance of holding their position. She couldn't afford to give them time to regroup. The Eldritch had to know they were serious. We'll send a team to disable their shields. If we breach the core, we'll have the final blow, Evelyn ordered. Deploy the stealth ships and prepare the assault team. As her orders were carried out, Evelyn turned her attention to the Shalaran fleet. Despite the damage, their forces were pushing forward, led by their flagship. The Zorath had underestimated their strength and resilience, and now they were paying the price. Aerith approached her quietly, his usual calm demeanor replaced with an edge of urgency. The Eldritch are watching, Admiral. They've been manipulating this war from the shadows. If we don't act quickly, they'll reassert their control over the Zorath and everyone else. Evelyn glanced at him, her jaw tightening. I know, this is more than just a battle. It's a declaration. We're not just fighting the Zorath. We're fighting for the galaxy's future. Thra's eyes met hers, his tone soft but serious. Be ready. The Eldritch will not take this lightly. The stealth ships moved through the heart of the nebula, evading the Zorath's remaining defenses. The Zorath command station loomed ahead, a colossal structure brimming with power, surrounded by an energy shield that pulsed with a menacing glow. The assault team was ready, their mission clear: infiltrate the station, disable the shields, and leave no room for the Zorath to regroup. Evelyn watched as the first wave of Shalaran and human fighters approached the station. A mixture of precision and chaos, the fight now seemed like an unstoppable tide. She knew the resistance would have to press on until the very end. All forces, deploy, she commanded, the weight of her words steady but resolute. This is it. Take them down. No mercy. The first salvo hit the Zorath shield with a thunderous impact, rocking the space around them. Evelyn felt the force through the bridge of the Resolute, and she could see the damage unfolding on the tactical readouts. The Zorath were beginning to break under the combined pressure of the Shalaran heavy ships and the human fighters. Suddenly, a transmission came through. It was a Zorath signal, somehow slipping past their defenses. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as the voice crackled through the calm. Admiral Kane, the voice of a Zorath commander echoed, distorted by static. You may win this battle, but the Eldritch will never allow you to succeed. They control the fate of the galaxy. You cannot stop them. Evelyn's gaze was fierce as she stared at the screen, her response unwavering. The Eldritch have used your kind, manipulated you. The time for their control is over. You fight for a future, not for them. The Zorath commander's laugh came through, low and hollow. You are naive, human. The Eldritch have no weakness. They are eternal. Then let's test that theory, Evelyn said coldly, cutting the transmission off. She turned to her crew, giving a sharp nod. Prepare for the final strike. We finish this now. The assault team infiltrated the Zorath command station, disabling the shield generators one by one. As the final barrier fell, the resistance fleet moved in for the kill. The Zorath command station exploded into a brilliant fiery cloud of debris. The galaxy had just witnessed the first major victory in the fight against the Eldritch. As the dust settled, Evelyn stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her eyes watching the aftermath of the battle. The Zorath were scattered, their power shattered for the moment, but she knew that the real fight had only just begun. The Eldritch would not let this defeat go unanswered. Yet, despite the uncertainty that loomed, there was a palpable sense of triumph in the air. They had struck a blow, and the galaxy had taken its first step toward reclaiming its freedom. Admiral, Tyrell said, breaking the silence. We've done it. The Zorath stronghold is down. The Shallorans are already pushing forward, and we have secured the area. Evelyn took a deep breath, her resolve as firm as ever. This is just the beginning. We've shown them that we're not afraid to fight back. Now we prepare for the next phase. We finish what we started. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Eldritch were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But Evelyn Kane had made a promise to fight for peace, to free the galaxy from their manipulation. And she would see that promise fulfilled, no matter the cost.